Main Street Media Utah and this is Talk with Jon. I am your host, Jon. Looking forward to being with you today. Today we're doing a little bit of an abbreviated show. I'm under the weather, but we've got our second Tuesday of the month guest lined up. He will be joining us shortly, and definitely want to bring to you what he has to share. A bill that if you go to Main Street Media, or you go to X at Media Utah, that is Main Street Media Utah's X account. They've got a little thing. So the census says there is 3.55 million people in Utah as of July 2025. 500,000 illegals, 14%. There's a lot of jobs. So one of the bills that is being discussed is how we can get driving privileges cards for illegals. Curious what your thoughts are on that. Mine is if they're illegal aliens, if they're here illegally, we should not make it more easy for them to do things here legally. If you're an illegal alien, you need to go about doing this the right way. Excuse me. I have a number of family members who have family members and friends who have done that. I have a family member that their family spent 10 to 20 years trying to come to the United States legally. And they're taking some effort, doing work. You know, it takes effort, work, and money for them to become citizens of the United States. And I had a conversation with my son, who's a minor, but almost not. And he was like, well, I think it should be easier for people to become citizens of the United States. And I said, I don't think so. I think it should be more difficult. It should be a difficult process. It should not be easy to become a citizen of the United States. In fact, I think it's because it's been so easy for people to come to the United States that we have so much of the issues that we have going on with fraud. If it wasn't so easy to come to the United States and to commit fraud, we wouldn't have the situations that we're having in California and Minneapolis. Forgive me, folks, I'm coughing a little bit. I've got a little bit of a chest cold that I'm fighting. But the bottom line is we should not let people into the United States legally. It should be a difficult process. And that representative that was on the floor talking about how it should be easier, we need to create a pathway to get to get illegals driver privileges cards. No, we do not need to make it easier. Her claim is, well, people will just get in accidents. Well, they need, and they don't understand the language. Well, there are real easy solutions to that. Learn the language. Come here legally. That's the way to get it done. All right. So now joining me, I'm going to be bringing on here my guest, and editor of the World Affairs Brief here momentarily. But let's bring him on. Joel, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you being here.
That's all right. I'm in my workshop because of the short notice getting to my interview.
Well, I appreciate a man's workshop. It speaks about a man. First of all, that you have a workshop. I'd say that's on some level impressive. And I think it's pretty cool that we have a little insight into Joel Skousen. So, Joel, please forgive me, and the audience, please forgive me. I forgot to get the show started off, and so first, I want to give out the show mantra and the show prayer. I try to do that at the beginning of every show, and you don't necessarily get that because sometimes you join me as the second guest. But I didn't do that already, so let me get the show prayer. No need to add this. This is just the prayer of my heart when it comes to doing. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra, where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. The Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. All right, we got that out of the way. So Joel Skousen, folks, is the editor of the World Affairs Brief, political commentator, has been on the scene since the 80s, and just a political mind that I've been listening to for somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 years now. So Joel, thank you for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, John.
All right, well, let's get into, there are let's see, 7 topics that I emailed you that I was thinking about covering, and we may not get to all of them, but let me go over what those topics are, and then feel free to take your choice on how we cover them, how we go about covering them, and what order. The politics of budget and shutdowns, more Epstein revelations, Iran confrontation growing, pediatricians propagandizing the public on childhood vaccines, rebellion against ICE, update on Russia and Chinese war preparations, and the CFR's comments on Trump at Davos, and just in general, Trump and Davos. So, where would you like to start, Joel?
Well, let's talk about the budget. It's a perennial problem now. It used to be that we had a shutdown every 3 or 4 years when there was a fairly equal balance between Democrats and Republicans in the Congress. And now that it's a very, very close split, it doesn't take many defections to make it a stalemate process. And so we have now partial shutdowns, and that's a benefit in the sense that you don't shut down the whole government. It used to be that the Democrats would shut down, especially all of the things that were essential for people, to make them, tell their Republican representatives that they've got to vote for the Democratic budget. But now we have, of course, Donald Trump compromising with the Democrats so that he can have a victory in saying, well, I solved the shutdown problem. But unfortunately, there were a tremendous amount of add-ons to the budget and basically pork barrel politics that are very, very damaging to the long-term agenda that Trump signed on to. One of the big holdups, of course, was the budget of whether or not they were going to fund DHS, which the Democrats were stopping in order to halt the funding of ICE. The problem is ICE is already funded. You're not defunding ICE when you cut the DHS budget because it's already funded. This happened last summer, and that funding will last through the year. But there are a great many compromises. For example, this week, the House, in the 5-bill spending package that the Senate passed and the House passed, there were $3 million for transgender surgery in Denver, Colorado, $1 million for transgender surgery in New Jersey, $1.5 million for abortions in Washington State, $1.6 million for transgender hormones in Maine, $500,000 for abortions in Illinois, $240,000 for transgender care in Pennsylvania, and it goes on and on the list. I mean, I've got a list of the World Affairs Brief that is probably 15 or 20 items. And for example, you're funding all of the refugee services that are basically using taxpayer money to make it comfortable for illegals to stay in the United States. And you have $3 million for socialized housing in New York City. Metropolitan Opera gets new elevators. In DEI, which you thought was dead, there's lots of funding for DEI that's still going on in the United States. For example, $900,000 for Asian Americans for equality, $900,000, or for Hispanic equality. I mean, it just goes on and on. So this is a real problem, John, in the sense that when Donald Trump says, I want a victory, and he'll claim a victory, it involves a lot of compromise, and that's how we keep funding abortion and transgender surgeries.
What can we do? Here's my question. Do you think that the line could be held by Trump and by the Republicans, and that the Democrats eventually would cave? Or do you think it's something that in today's political system, you've just got to make these compromises?
Well, in today's political system, there are too many liberal Republicans that will side with the Democrats on issues to be able to hold them hostage to it. So we're past the time when you can force the Democrats to capitulate on all their issues. There are too many Republicans that are going to vote for these things. So I'm afraid, as I've said for a long time, we're not going to save the country. It's a matter of slowing the downhill slide. And fortunately, that gives us a little more time to prepare for the war that's coming. And it's coming sooner because Donald Trump is basically playing up to Russia and China, who are the main antagonists in this next war.
What should Donald Trump be to delay the war more than he is? What should the and when I say Donald Trump, not just Donald Trump, but even the Republicans that are in the House and Senate.
Well, the Republicans won't do anything unless it pleases Donald Trump. Donald Trump runs the country. He's the king of the country now. He runs it. He acts like king. He's arrogant. And, and I say this as a conservative critic of Donald Trump. But the big problem is that he keeps giving in to Xi Jinping in terms of allowing him to trade. Now, we need to really start to cut back, very severely on Chinese trade. For example, in this latest compromise where he got the rare earth minerals for one more year, and he's going to try to make a $12 billion stockpile of rare earth minerals, but I don't know where you're going to get the extra ones. You're barely going to have enough to feed the existing industrial requirements for rare earth minerals, let alone stockpile $12 billion worth in that. So I'm not sure that that's going to happen. But he also gave the NVIDIA AI chip, allowed NVIDIA to sell that to China, and China's already ahead in AI. That's just a very damaging thing to do. And so, if we cut trade with China, I know it would hurt Americans who have been very spoiled with the cheap prices from China. But still, that would bring down China's economy and create a great deal of social unrest in China, which, might delay Xi Jinping's ability to make war. Now, there has been this major upheaval within the Chinese military. Number one, head of the Chinese Military Commission, which was a Xi Jinping acolyte, was taken out. And, they say it's corruption, but, nobody's really sure. There's a lot of corruption in all communist countries, especially Russia and China. But there's also some politics being played there about some dissatisfaction with Xi Jinping. And it's hard, unless you read the Epoch Times, who have a lot of insider sources within China, being anti-communist Chinese themselves. They have some pretty good reporting on this, but it's also pretty optimistic. They keep thinking that they're going to be able to overthrow, or there's going to be rebellion against the communists, and I don't see that at all. But Donald Trump could make that unrest in China a lot worse if he played hardball with China. And there would be a lot of not social unrest necessarily, but a lot of hardship on Americans because of the increase in tariffs, which is what he would use to stop 100% tariff on Chinese goods would essentially stop a lot of the imports that are coming into the United States.
Okay, so I want to flesh this out just a little bit. So in general, if I understand correctly, Joel, you are against tariffs in general, but specifically for specific countries.
I'm all for actually not having any trade at all with your existential enemies. You should not trade with them at all. All right. But if you do, and we have, and those are the globalists like Henry Kissinger that opened up most favored nations status for China to bring those goods into the United States. And then the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, did the same thing when he got in for the Republicans. It wasn't part of the contract with America, but that's the first thing he passed as Speaker in the House was getting China into the World Trade Organization, where they have most favored nation status. And so we've had a flood of goods in there, and that has allowed China to build themselves into a first-class peer military competitor with the United States. It is the technology that they have stolen or have required as a condition of doing business in China that has given them all of the technology, plus they built their industrial might so that they are a first-class, competitor now in terms of military and industrial capacity.
Where is their biggest strength
China's
in the military? In China's where is China's biggest strength? And maybe even like on 2 or 3 levels, because you have, you have their missiles, you have their navy, you have the army, and your thoughts on both that and where you
Well,
what their biggest strengths are.
none of the Chinese military has any combat experience, and so they're going to be hard pressed to do combined arms, which are very sophisticated. Nothing exemplified that more than the U.S. raid on Maduro in Venezuela. That's real, true combined arms, where you take down all the Chinese radars in there so they can't see anything. You take down their missiles. You take down all of their anti-aircraft batteries, and so that you can come in almost and then you use a secret, sound blaster weapon to demobilize 100 defenders of Maduro in that military base where he was taken. I mean, the U.S. showed some sophisticated military capabilities in that, and they're going to do the same thing in Iran pretty soon, which we'll talk about. But China's greatest strength is in mass, military mass, in Air Force. They can outproduce us by 10 to 1 now in ships, in aircraft.
Wow.
Now they aren't as sophisticated, but they're about 90% up to what the United States can do. The military missiles and surveillance aircraft that they provided to Pakistan allowed them to shoot down Indian fighters without even crossing the Pakistan-India border. And they did that by launching missiles that were then guided to their targets by the AWACS control airplanes that China had provided them. And this is something that the U.S. can do. We don't even know I don't think Russia can do that, but China now can do that, and they're a peer enemy. So that's a very difficult thing. But they've also got, 1 million men on arms. They aren't experienced in combat, and so they're going to be at a disadvantage there. And we don't know how good they're going to be in their Navy deployments. They built 3 aircraft carriers now, and one that pretty much rivals some of the aircraft carriers that we have with electronic catapults and other things. But, running a 3,000 to 5,000 man crew on an aircraft carrier is a very complex, difficult process. I think it will take them at least 5 years from the time they started, which was a couple of years ago, to iron out the bugs in that. Now, they still say they're going to be ready to take Taiwan in 2027, but I don't think so. I think that that's probably going to be slip a year or two, in my opinion.
Okay, so let me ask you this on taking Taiwan. We're going to lose the chip manufacturing that we get there and some of the other high tech stuff. But directly speaking, how does that set the timetable for then an attack directly on America?
Well, it sets the timetable in my analysis because of North Korea. The U.S. is planning on intervening when China strikes Taiwan. And the U.S. is beefing up Taiwan defenses, batteries, missile batteries, and other types of things. And so I would expect within 2 weeks after China starts and we intervene in that North Korea will enter the war and attack South Korea, which will divert our forces. We'll have to defend the 26,000 U.S. troops we have in South Korea. And we got to remember, too, that South Korea is a pro-communist government right now. And they ousted the conservative government and put him in prison for, trying to declare martial law against the communist takeover of the country. But there's a lot of pro-North Korean people in the government of North Korea. And so this is going to be a very, very bad situation. North Korea has threatened to attack the U.S. forces in Guam, in Okinawa, and perhaps in Hawaii if we try to attack China or stop China from taking Taiwan. So that would trigger World War III because, if we attack North Korea, they have a military pact with China. China will have to come to the defense, and that means missiles. That means that they'll launch that long predicted preemptive strike on U.S. military targets, not cities, but military targets, and that will usher in World War III.
So here's my question. Is China going to wait to do that until Russia is ready? They need Russia to be ready to join in?
Well, Russia's already ready in the sense that the only thing Russia has to offer China is its nuclear missile forces, which are the largest in the world, exceeding our forces by at least 3 times. And China, nobody really knows how much China's got. We've never had any inspectors in there. The Pentagon has, for decades, understated the nuclear powers of China, but all of their missiles and nuclear facilities are underground, so there's no way for us to tell really what they have. But I think you can count on the fact that for every missile that China deploys, they have at least 3 warheads on that, and maybe as many as 5. And so if they now have 1,000 missiles deployed, then that means they have 3,000 to 5,000 warheads, not the puny 500 to 1,000 that the Pentagon says. So this is a very dangerous situation, but still it doesn't even come close to compare with the missile throw weight of Russia, which has 10 to 15 maneuvering warheads on the Yars missiles and many of the other missiles that they have.
Well, we're kind of talking about the update on the Russia and Chinese war preparations. So,
well, in that line, it's very interesting that the U.S. has just announced that they are already in production for the 6th generation fighter, the F-47. And you say, how could that happen? They just got the contract. Well, it turns out they've admitted that they've been flying that and doing all of the testing for years in Area 51 under secrecy. And so now it's ready to go into full production the month after they get the contract signed. This is amazing stuff.
Wow. Okay, so how far advanced is the 6th generation? And I believe it's the F-47. Is that right?
F-47. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. No, it's a highly stealth aircraft, fully capable, like F-22 and F-35 can do all of those things, but with even greater stealth. Now, Russia claims that their new S-500 system can detect and shoot down stealth aircraft, but nobody really believes the Russians on that. The Chinese have a radar array, which they believe can see stealth fighters, like the B-2 bomber and the F-22. But it's a huge array. It's a huge phased array radar that's about 10 stories tall. It sits out like a store thumb, and it only takes a missile directed at that to blow it apart, like we did in Venezuela. And so that's not really much of an effect. But when you can get a small radar, and I don't know if they can, a small radar that, for example, operates the S-500 ABM system of Russia, I don't know how you can detect stealth with a tiny radar system that is portable like that. It takes a huge 10-story building array, to do that. And that's very vulnerable.
So one thing that goes through my mind as you're talking to me about this, we know that China owns lots of property around Air Force bases. And I'm assuming that they're trying to test their radar arrays to see if they can track the B-2s and
No. That would be too obvious, John. Those radar arrays are way too
really
big. Yeah. Oh, yes. I think within farm buildings and other things that they put, you'll have massive amounts of drones that will be inside there that they can unleash to go either to surveil what's at the military bases or to do drone attacks. We don't have any hardened revetments for our aircraft that are sitting ducks there at these Air Force bases. And so that's the danger of having China nearby, is drones. And missiles. I mean, they could put missiles in those and launch some missiles at the bases as well. But this is very foolish to allow Red China or Russia to own property in the United States, especially near military bases. In fact, I don't believe any non-citizens ought to be able to own properties or businesses in the United States.
Okay, that's not it. I'm asking why, not because I disagree, but I want to hear you explain why you think that should be the case.
Well, it's part of my political theory that citizenship gives you the privilege of owning property in the United States, um, and if you allow non-citizens, I mean, residents can be residents, they can rent things in my political system, but you've got to have some motivation for people to become citizens rather than just come in and be residents and to work or to rent cars or houses or whatever you have. You want to have a motivation for people to become citizens because it's by qualification in what I believe we need to do, not by birth, even for Americans. You're part of your parents' citizenship up until the age 18, but at age 18, you have to take a test. You have to know what the Constitution says, what's proper law and what is improper to legislate, so that if people elect a communist to the legislature, he loses his citizenship as soon as he starts to do something that's against the Constitution, which prohibits, by the way, socialism and redistribution in a proper constitution. So, in light of that, that's why I don't think we ever ought to allow non-citizens to own property. They ought to have to become a citizen, and or they can deal with the United States from outside uh, and import things. They don't have to, business. But if you have a car manufacturing plant in the United States, it needs to be owned by U.S. citizens.
Um, are there any other countries that have that same system that you're proposing? Let me be clear. I would love to do it. I would love to do it. I'd love to make that happen. I think it would be great for the country. But is there any other countries that have a similar type system?
Yeah, China, for example, Russia. They don't allow you to own property in those countries.
I mean, by not necessarily birthright citizenship. You don't become a citizen just by because you were born in this country to American citizens, where you have to take the test at 18 to prove that you
No,
are
there's none of that anywhere. No.
okay.
No, but that you see, that's the only way you can stop ignorant people from voting away your rights. You see, no matter how much of a tight constitution you have, if the majority can overrule that constitution, can amend it, then as soon as they become indoctrinated and socialized, then they'll amend the constitution to allow socialism and redistribution of wealth. I mean, the proof of that is if you take away the welfare benefits that now consume over $400 billion a year out of the US budget, you take that away, and believe me, because it's unconstitutional, if the Supreme Court ruled, they would have that amended within a year.
I'm sure they would.
Yeah. That's what happens. But you see, if you have a qualified citizenship, and it's an open book test, the answers are there. You have to learn it, though. You have to learn it so that you know, and you have to sign on the dotted line, in my political theory, that you won't violate any of those provisions of the Constitution if you agree to be a citizen. And so as soon as you violate that, you lose your citizenship. So you can elect a communist to the House of Representatives, but as soon as he starts to propose something that's a violation of the Constitution, he's out and he's no longer a citizen. Now, that's how you enforce free markets and liberty in a country with a qualified citizenship.
Wish we had it. Wish we had it in place. We'd be in a lot better
we've never
position than we are right
never had that in place. We used to have, at the beginning, you used to have a means test for voting where you had to be a property owner, you had to have a certain amount of money. And that's not a good criteria. The only criteria for being able to vote is to be knowledgeable voters. to be knowledgeable about your rights in the Constitution and have signed a pact that you will not use the vote to violate those rights of other people. Now, that's a tight system.
Well, like I said, I wish we had that. All right. Is there anything else that you want to cover on Russia and Chinese war preparations?
No, although I don't think that the Iran war, if it comes to pass, is going to involve Russia or China. They're going to stay out of it, as they have in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now,
let's hit
China
the Iran.
China has a real vested interest in Iran because of the oil supply. But I don't think that they're ready for World War III yet, and so they won't intervene militarily to protect that oil supply. But if the Ayatollahs are overthrown and a military government is installed there, more amenable to the West, then China could lose its supply of oil as it's losing it from Venezuela right now.
What do you think the United States should do about Iran? So let me make a two-part question. What do you predict that they are going to be doing? Are we going to be having, what level of attack are we going to be doing against Iran? What do you predict there? And then what do you think the outcome will be?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that Israel is behind all of this, including the protests. They've shipped him a lot of arms and ammunition into Iran to feed to the protesters. And that's why Iran, now I'm not saying Iran is a good government. I mean, it's a radical Muslim government. It suppresses the rights of the pro-West educated class in Iran. And but Israel, of course, wants Iran neutered because it is the major threat to Israel. And, Israel has attacked Iran on several times, but Iran retaliated to a certain extent, but is holding their fire until they build up for what's coming now. Iran is busy building missiles. And right now, Trump is demanding not only they give up their total nuclear program, but they give up all ballistic missile production as well. And Iran's not going to buy that. They know that they have no defenses at all against Israel or anyone else, or the U.S. or the West, unless they have ballistic missiles. Whether or not they have nukes is not the key issue. They're just now getting ballistic missiles that can reach the United States so that they can threaten back to Donald Trump. But he's really doing Netanyahu's bidding here in ginning up this war in Iran. And Iran is a very, very strong military country because they have thousands of missiles. And believe me, they can throw a swarm of missiles at an aircraft carrier, and some of those missiles are going to get through. Now, the U.S. just did a SINK-X exercise. A SINK-X is a sinking of an aircraft carrier exercise to see how difficult it is. They sunk the USS America, a Nimitz class or a Kitty Hawk class aircraft carrier. That was a substantial aircraft carrier during the Vietnam War. And it was extremely difficult to sink. They threw torpedoes at it. They threw missiles at it. It still stayed afloat. They had to, it took over a week to sink that aircraft carrier. And China was watching, very interested. And it was very discouraging. It was very discouraging to China because they have all of these anti-ship missiles that they're going to throw at the aircraft carriers that the U.S. sends to defend Taiwan. And it's going to be very difficult to sink them. They're very compartmentalized. They have double hull construction. And they have firefighting equipment and massive pumps. And so it's going to be difficult. But the USS America went to the bottom, I think 16,000 feet under the ocean now, but it took a week to do it.
Wow.
With U.S. arms, which are some of the best.
Do you think that it will start with a nuclear attack do you think China would attack an aircraft carrier with a nuclear weapon?
No, I don't think so. I think they're going to use conventional weapons to start off with. Um, they'll wait till there's a confrontation with North Korea, and it may well be because of the overwhelming force that North Korea can bring to bear on South Korea, that the U.S. may have to use tactical weapons to defend South Korea or our troops there against an overwhelming odds of North Korea, having almost 1 million men under arms. And it's that trigger event that could justify China saying, well, you started the use of nuclear weapons, so we're going to launch on your military. But I don't think China's going to start with nuclear weapons. They're going to start with conventional strike on Taiwan.
So back to Iran. Do you think so is it going to be the United States that's going to be leading the attack,
No,
or
I think
is it going to
actually
be
Israel will
Who's
start it,
which?
and then the U.S. will finish it. That's how most military analysts see this. U.S. coming to the aid of Israel because Iran retaliates against Israel. But, the United States aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln has already shot down one Shihab drone that Iran had sent towards the aircraft carrier. Now, that's only one drone. If they had, and that was shot down by an F-35, but if they had 100 drones coming in, would be very, very difficult, and it would expend a tremendous amount of munitions. It would be a very short war.
So that is one of the questions that I have is we don't have much reserves. And we're being outproduced.
And I can't afford to use up the reserves that we have, lest we become vulnerable to Russia and China. Now, China's going to love this. China's going to love Iran to suck up a lot of SM-2 through 6 standard missiles off of our Aegis destroyers and our used up to defend against Iran. And we're already in a shortage, and now it's being replenished. But these things cost, $1 million to $5 million a piece. So these are very expensive missiles to run.
Okay, so I'm hearing about a lot of missiles. Is there any other? Are we going to be using tanks? Are we going to be sending tanks over?
No, I don't think it's going to be a ground war at all. I think they want to. Basically, what the United States wants to do is to decapitate as much of the military of Iran as possible and get the Iranian military to overthrow the Ayatollahs and take over in response. That's what the U.S. wants. They want a military takeover and to oust the Iranians or the Ayatollahs. But they don't want to invade the country, and that would be something the Americans certainly would not support, to have another massive invasion with long-term occupation and things. It's a big country. It would be very difficult to occupy.
I want to say it's several times the size of Iraq, if I remember correctly.
Well, and in terms of weapons and munitions, you're 10 times larger than Iraq. So it's a formidable. Now, they've got an awful lot of naval power as well. And, what's interesting is they've already captured 2 tankers in the Straits of Hormuz, which is very provocative. The U.S. thwarted one of a U.S. flag tanker. They had one of the U.S. destroyers shadowing it, which stopped the takeover of the tanker. But then there were 2 others that they did successfully take over. And Trump could use any of those as an excuse, but he's right now waiting for the negotiations to play out. And right now he's pushing hard for this banning any missile production, and Iran's just not going to buy that. So there may be another strike on the remaining nuclear facilities that they didn't get in the B-2 bomber strike. Pickaxe Mountain was not hit, for example, where the U.S. suspects was all the remaining nuclear development centrifuges and storage facilities were in Pickaxe Mountain. So it's hard to tell how it's going to do, but I don't think the U.S. and Trump is going to go for troops on the ground. They're going to try to destroy enough of the military that the military facilities and missile facilities that the military overthrows the Ayatollahs and says, let's make a deal.
So is there a pretty big in the military already for
Well,
Iran in Iran?
that's what we suspect, but it's really hard to know what's going on. It's a very, very, the military right now is playing enforcement. They're doing all the enforcement for the Ayatollahs, and they don't like doing that to a great extent. But right now, the Republican Guards, work for the Ayatollahs, and they need a leader who's willing to rebel against that. But we'll just have to see what happens. But I think there's going to be a conflict. I don't think that this is going to end in a negotiated settlement. Now, it's going to be very costly in terms of U.S. reserves. It's going to make us very vulnerable if the Taiwan attack happens shortly after this. We're going to be in a real shortage.
So I guess that's the timing. Do you foresee, if we attack Iran, that China will attack Taiwan within months or less?
I don't think China's ready. They've got too many problems military wise and economic wise. I just don't think they're ready right now to take advantage of that. But they'd like to see a real drawdown in U.S. reserves, and they'll be watching and trying to observe how the U.S. military does their things. That's why Russia let the U.S. go in unopposed into Iraq. They were observing, and they were taking notes and practicing throwing some of their experimental anti-tank weapons in there too.
Well, unless you have any more thoughts on that, I'd like to hit the Epstein revelations, and
Okay.
I don't know if it would be quicker if you've got a quick thought on pediatricians propagandizing the public on childhood vaccines. I don't know if you want to hit that first. Which one do you want to cover first?
Sure. The American Association of Pediatricians is a radical pro-vaccine. They get millions of dollars in kickbacks for their physicians who are working on children for the rate of vaccinations they have for people. And so Dr. Otis, one of the heads on the board of directors, came out and said that children can absorb up to 10,000 vaccines and discriminate between them and not be harmed. Just ludicrous, given the best information now out is that just the schedule of 18 to 24 vaccines that school children are required to have before school age, that whole load of vaccine damage is what's causing a lot of the autism and especially the SIDS, the sudden infant death syndrome, which is not a sudden infant death syndrome. It's a vaccine damage syndrome, and it's killing children. And, the medical profession is just trained to say, no, it can't be the vaccines. And that's why they call it the syndrome. They refuse. In fact, certain states are requiring now in an autopsy for a child death that they consider vaccine damage. And they were twins just recently that both died perfectly healthy after receiving a battery of vaccines. And I blame the parents. Any parent who allows their babies and young children to be vaccinated when their immune system is not prepared to repel the foreign substances, DNA and garbage that's in vaccines, just criminal.
Okay, so do you put the blame more on parents than you do on the medical field?
No, not at all. But parents should be smart enough to say no. They should be smart enough to homeschool rather than send their kids to public schools if they have to be vaccinated. And fortunately, the HHS is downing or downsizing the required numbers of vaccines for schools, but still any vaccines are dangerous now. As Robert F. Kennedy wrote in his book, of which he's been in denial of since he's in government now, is there's no way to mass produce a safe vaccine. And he's right. There's going to be deaths from a vaccine. So you're playing Russian roulette, especially for vaccines like chickenpox and measles and things. There's no reason to take a vaccine for non-deadly type things, which help build your immune system.
Right. Um, I want to get into Jeffrey Epstein. Um,
Yeah.
and because this is kind of Joel, this is kind of my thoughts. Uh, it's the I don't know if it's the Rosetta Stone for understanding what's happening with the deep state and how satanic their control is. But I think it gives I why is this news reporter's mom so important in the news? Why are we paying so much attention to it? My supposition is, this is my opinion, is because they've got to divert attention and time from something that's kind of interesting, can catch America's heart, and pull on the heartstrings. Nobody wants their mom to be taken out of her home. But the bottom line is if people start paying attention to some of the revelations that have come out from the Epstein files, like there's an email that says talks about 7 people sharing one piece of pizza. In my entire life, I've never seen 7 people share a piece of pizza. And they talk about beef jerky and keeping it cold. And there's some other stuff that is even worse. The bottom line is that pizza, the term pizza, is code for children. And if we realized, and if it came out what who's involved, it may bring down the whole system. The question is how many Republicans are involved? How many Democrats are involved? Is Donald Trump himself involved? So I would like to get your thoughts on the Epstein files and what it could reveal and why they want to hide it so bad.
Well, let there be no mistake. Donald Trump has instructed his DOJ and FBI to hide the identities of all of his wealthy elite, friends that have been guilty of sex crimes in the files. And Representative Thomas Massey and another representative who's a Democrat have been, I can't pronounce his name or remember it right now, but they went forward and produced the act that required all those files. But they went to the DOJ just this week because they were allowed to see the redacted files. And they came out saying, well, let me tell you, folks, despite the 3 million miscellaneous files and all the embarrassing stuff that came out of that, 70% of the stuff is still redacted and not being released. They were allowed to come out with about 10 names that they publicly announced, and I didn't recognize all but one of those. But these people were protected. And they said, if we can go in there and find these names now, the public ought to be able to see these names. This is very damaging stuff. But fortunately, the alternative media has a memory. And the files released by the FBI did contain damaging material to Donald Trump. And I'm not going to repeat the stuff they have on it, but it involves pedophilia. It involves very, very abusive stuff. I linked to it in this week's World Affairs Brief that people can read it if they want. They have screen captures of the FBI files from the victims stating what Donald Trump did to them as 14 and 12-year-old girls. And I believe them. I think Donald Trump is guilty as hell of being involved in this, and that's why he has, tried to make sure that none of this stuff got revealed. Well, the FBI took it down immediately after they realized that they had released some of this stuff by mistake, but not before the internet recorded it. And so it's out there in the alternative media. It's out there about Bill Gates and, his getting an STD from a Russian prostitute and then trying to get Jeffrey Epstein to see if there's any way to give his wife antibiotics because he knew it was going to pass on this sexually transmitted disease to his wife without her knowing about it. All kinds of stuff coming in now. And you're right about the code words. Tucker Carlson, and people can look up on the internet, did a very interesting interview recently with an expert on this pedophilia thing, and they talked about the code words about pizza and grape soda. It shows up hundreds of times in these emails. Pizza and grape soda. Now,
Grape soda.
who drinks grape soda with pizza? It's just not a known thing. But it shows up all kinds of times, and it's a code name for certain types of sexual abuse of underage children. And I don't know exactly what it is, but it's there. And so the Pizzagate controversy, of course, was debunked supposedly by the media with some false information they threw out of, but it was real. I mean, it may not have been a basement in that pizza parlor, but their website having pedophilia type thing on it, it was indicative of the fact that that's what happens in use of these code words. So the pedophilia is very, very real, and it talks about Benny Netanyahu is mentioned many, many times. Donald Trump is mentioned hundreds of times in the files. So has Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, and then what I covered in the World Affairs Brief as well was the media is trying to put out a bunch of disinformation about Epstein being a Russian agent. And this is to divert people from the fact that he is a deep state. Now, sure, the Russians may have inserted one of their honey traps or one of their beautiful Russian girls into them, and Epstein made use of her and, gave one of those girls to Bill Gates and things. Does that mean that he's a Russian agent? No, he was doing sex trafficking for the Israelis, for the deep state, for the Russians. Who else knows? I mean, but it's pretty much shut down now, or at least it's gone underground. And I pointed out in the World Affairs Brief, that doesn't mean that they still don't do honey traps and try to blackmail people. But the big operation that he was running, and by the way, there are in the safe that they found in his New York house, there were hard drives, numerous hard drives, just filled with compromising information. And the FBI is never going to reveal that because they're going to protect the identity. Now, some of the identities are coming out, and I just think that all of the wealthy, famous people who are allowed to get ahead in politics and especially and some conservatives are involved, that's to be sure, but most of this is on the left. And people who are in the globalist movement and things, they have immunity. People who are a part of the deep state have the promise of immunity. And Donald Trump is working hard to give them that immunity. He's failing right now. And it's forced me to reassess what I've always claimed, that Donald Trump is not deep state. He's highly manipulable by them. But now that we see how much information they have on him, they really do have abilities to twist. Now, you can't make a man who is a blowhard and an egomaniac who can't control what he says in public, you can't make him into a reliable puppet for the deep state. Yeah, George Bush you can, Barack Obama you can, the Clintons you can. They're well-spoken, they're careful, but not Donald Trump. That doesn't mean that they don't control some things about him, though. But I think they usually use manipulation and appeal to his ego through flattery, and they've, even Putin and Xi Jinping both use flattery on Donald Trump to get him to think, I've got a great relationship with these people.
Right. What do you think would happen if all the names came out that are in those files? If we got the unredacted information, what do you think would happen?
Nothing.
Why?
Well, except for the fact you got to remember that none of this is provable in court. Except the victim statements. That's he said, she said. Unless you had the video evidence revealed, then you could prosecute. Otherwise, there's going to be nothing except some resignations. For example, in Britain, you've had the chief of staff of the British prime minister resign. You've had the ambassador to the United States from Britain resign. He's deeply involved in the Epstein sex things. Of course, you have Prince Andrew, etc. But that's about the only thing you're going to get is resignations. Even in the prosecution of Department of Justice attorneys that went after lawfare against Donald Trump have been allowed to resign rather than be prosecuted. This is part of the immunity protection racket that is happening even under Donald Trump. So he's not only not draining the deep state, he's protecting the people that are involved in the pedophilia. And it's rampant. I believe it's really rampant. You know, they love to have homosexuality and pedophilia as well as immorality against your wife as blackmail against people, but they really like the ones that are taboo still relatively in society, like pedophilia and homosexuality.
Okay, so I look at this and I go, I don't think people care as much about someone cheating on their wife as they used to be, right? I don't think that's as big of an issue. But the going after children and pedophiles, I'm like, why aren't those in the FBI that are looking at this? Why aren't they speaking up? How are they keeping them quiet?
Well,
Because I look at those men and women as cowards for not bringing that information forward.
who has the information they're not bringing forward?
So the hard drives that were found in Epstein's.
Well, Kash Patel has been told by Donald Trump.
You know, all those hard drives.
Kash Patel has been told by Donald Trump to bury that stuff, not to release it, and so has Pam Bondi. They're protecting this information.
But okay. So, are you guessing that those have not really been reviewed? Period.
Oh no, they know what's inside those. Now, you know how many hard drives? There's probably thousands of hours of
video,
the most heinous crimes against children and things, and you could get the identity of those people. You could prosecute those people. They should be bringing these people in. I'll tell you, when Christ said in the New Testament that it's better that a millstone be hanged around people's neck than they abuse these little ones. That's what's awaiting these people. But I'm here to tell you that not only does the deep state promise immunity, and they're making good on this, most of them making good on those promises of immunity, but at the higher levels of these conspiracies, and that's why this is satanic at its root, is that Satan promises people that he'll protect them from the suffering in hell. In other words, there's supposed to be an eternal immunity if they help Satan overthrow God and Christianity, and that's why these people are anti-Christian and anti-God and anti-goodness. But I'll tell you, just like Isaiah 14 talks about, these people, Satan, these people are in hell waiting for Satan to come, and he that was going to thrash the world to come and save them. And then they see him descend in chains into hell himself, Satan, and they say, art thou brought low like unto us? The jig is up. He's not going to be able to save them from hell. But I'll tell you, hell is a very, very real thing, and it's a part of Christian doctrine and is very rarely emphasized in churches today. But there will be great suffering for these kinds of sins.
To me, this is, if we could somehow overcome what is happening with Epstein, I think, and if we could get it to be known, and I think people would start turning away from evil more than they are right now.
I don't think so.
If the information came out, you think that people wouldn't turn away?
Remember, the evil people are not going to turn away. They're just going underground further. They're going to be more careful. It's just like the tailhook convention in the United States Navy. When you find out all this immorality going on in the Las Vegas tailhook convention, and they banned the convention, the Navy, participated. It just all went underground. You don't think that Navy people and military people overseas are moral, do you? You don't think because of the tailhook exploded, they became moral people? No, they just hid it more carefully.
What I mean is if Joe Q, average citizen, because I'd like to think 80% of our population would be totally devastated and appalled by the information that are in those files. If that came out, that's what I'm speaking
Yeah.
about.
There is no moral majority, John, in this nation. The number
I
of
concur.
moral people, listen, even Christians have an immorality problem. You look at the people, the mega churches, and the number of scandals about moral relationships that they've had with other women, etc. You look at what's happening in TP USA and Erica Kirk and all these things about people who wear Christianity on their sleeve and make a lot of money defending Israel for it are not moral. And a lot of these people are having problems. You know, people who believe in once born again, always born again, it always covers whatever sins that they do, they're really mistaken. They're mistaken. You can fall out of being born again. As soon as you begin to sin and tell the Lord to get lost and violate conscience, you're on the way out with the Lord. And the atonement doesn't cover it unless you repent.
The only reason why I'm smiling is because I wish it were true on some level that you could do that. But the bottom line is, you're right. It's a constantly fighting against my natural man and overcoming him. Well, we've eaten 6 o'clock, and I want to say thank you for joining us. Joel, can you please tell people how they can go about? And folks, let me be clear. Joel Skousen and the World Affairs Brief, I sign up for it. I could have it for free, but I pay for it because I think it's that worth it. I get the subscription. In fact, I do it for 2 years every time I need to sign up. So one of the great things about it is not only you get access and you can read it, they will email it to you, but you can even get the MP3 version typically on Friday afternoons. Joel, please tell people how they can get more of your information and how they can go about finding
the World Affairs Brief is showcased on my website, worldaffairsbrief.com. And if you click on the left-hand side, request a sample, you'll get the current brief, the current Friday brief, what we've been talking in part about, and it tells people how to subscribe. It's a modest $48 a year, about $1 a week, to get my view on world affairs every week.
Well, I'm going to say, Joel, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for coming in. It's been great having you, and we look forward to seeing you the second Tuesday of next month in March.
Okay. Thank you, John. Good to be with you.
All right. Thank you. All right, folks. That was Joel Skousen of the World Affairs Brief. We're so grateful to him joining us. And I'm going to say, folks, this has been KMMU, Main Street Media, Utah. I want to say thank you for joining us on it. Please go to our website, kmmu.org, and you can find out more about us there. So please forgive me playing a little bit chess stuff going on. So hopefully that didn't interfere much, but I want to say thank you, a big thank you to Joel Skousen. This has been Talk with John. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.